Afternoon. Welcome to Bill Cobbs on the record. This afternoon we're going to do something different. I'm going to start out by talking about the things that we're going to talk about in these podcasts. We're going to discuss politics, both local and national. We're going to discuss the state of the Black community. We're going to discuss what's happening in the world that has an impact on us. You know, people forget. People forget. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Black folks flocked to the Republican Party because they saw Lincoln as their great savior. And for a number of years, we clung to the Democratic Party, through Reconstruction. We clung to the Republican Party. Through Reconstruction, we clung to the Republican Party. And then when Hayes was elected president in 1876, the relationship changed because in order to gain the presidency, Hayes traded away Reconstruction. And all of the gains that Black people had garnered from 1865 to 1876 were slowly chipped away at. But Black people still continued to cling to the Republican Party. That is until FDR in the New Deal. Now the New Deal wasn't for Black folks, but it was something that gave it an opportunity that hadn't existed before. So many Black folks shifted gears and moved over to the Democratic Party. And, for the most part, since the days of FDR, Black folks have been in the Democratic camp, even when the Dixiecrats were coming to power in the South. I'm talking to you about this today because we're roughly about 19 months away from the next election in 2024. And in Michigan, I sometimes don't have a lot of faith in the Michigan Democratic Party because they have a tendency to put their hand on the scale for candidates. And I'm afraid that I'm seeing some of that happening as we speak. There's only one declared candidate in the race so far, and that's Alyssa Slotkin. And the full court press is being given to make her seem like the next savior for Michigan. And I'm concerned about that because that's not the way it's supposed to go. The party is supposed to be candidate neutral until it comes down to the general election. And thus far, there is no other declared candidate. And I don't think it's right that there should even be the appearance that Alyssa Slotkin is already the candidate. Some things that folks need to understand. The reason you have primaries is so that the public has an opportunity to get to know the candidates running for the race and understand what they're going to do when they get elected and how they're going to do it and when they're going to do it. There are folks that go to Washington every single day that made promises that they could never deliver on, but they were never asked how they were going to deliver and when they were going to deliver. So they sit there, and as long as they can manage to stay out of trouble and nobody with a brighter star comes along, they manage to get elected again and again and again. And this next election for Michigan is probably one of the most important that we'll ever see. That is, if we get to have elections after 2024, given the state of what this country is dealing with now. The thing that you need to understand is that Michigan is kind of a unique state in that while we have a balanced number of Democrats and Republicans, the Democratic vote in Michigan is large for the most part is really clustered in just one section of the state, and that's Southeast Michigan. That's Genesee County, Macomb, Wayne, Washtenaw, and Oakland. The largest population of Democrats in the state of Michigan live in those 5 counties. So, in order for a Democrat to win a statewide race, they have to be able to carry those 5 counties. And the thing you should understand about those 5 counties is that it's no coincidence that the Black population makes up a large percentage of those Democrats. So the Black vote is crucial to her winning, or any candidate winning. You know, folks don't remember that in the 2018 election cycle, when Gary Peters was running for his seat again, he only won that election by a few thousand votes. Now, what you have to remember is that Gary Peters in 2018 was able to garner 91.3% of the vote in Southeast Michigan. 91.3%. If he had been off of that by a few percentage points, he would not have won re-election. So there's a unique power that goes with Southeast Michigan. And I'm telling you this because it's important that we as a people, and I'm speaking specifically now about Black and brown people, do everything we can to make sure that we have a voice in this next election cycle, and that we don't just allow the Democrats to choose the candidate and we just line up behind their candidate. Now, I don't have anything personally against Alyssa Slotkin, except the fact that she is a moderate. She's a moderate. And for me, moderate means that you're okay with the way things are. You're not really that interested in making sure that there's change that benefits everyone. And I say that to you because all you have to do is look at Alyssa's voting record in Washington. When the reparations bill was brought up again, she didn't support it. She voted for it ultimately, but she didn't support it. When there's been other legislation that was specifically keyed towards the Black community, she has not been a supporter. So it's really time for us to make sure that the next senator that we send to Washington from Michigan is someone who is going to be attuned to our needs and to the things that will benefit us. And with the state of Michigan and what's going on in this country, it's got to be somebody strong and it's got to be somebody capable. Now, today, I posted a comment about this very subject, and folks came back to me and told me I was being unfair because Alyssa Slotkin is extremely qualified for the job. And my question to that was simple. Can you define for me what those unique and specific qualifications are? And more importantly, in the last 4 years, how she's used them to make sure that Michigan got out of Washington what it needed. I don't think that's too much to ask when somebody tells you somebody's qualified. You know, I think it's the bare minimum. You know, we have got to be prepared to do some homework and to hold people accountable. Now, there's another candidate, another person who says that they're thinking about running. They have not declared formally yet. We share something in common with him. I think we owe it to ourselves to hear everything he's got to say and give him a fair shot at making his case. That person is Hill Harper. I haven't made up my mind yet, but I'm still listening. I'm listening because I need to be able to evaluate what they're going to bring to the table. I'm going to move on now to another topic. And that topic is Clarence Thomas. And we're going to talk about Clarence because what happens with what the Supreme Court puts out impacts everybody in this nation, no matter what state they live in. Now, Clarence Thomas has been in the Supreme Court for 32 years. And for a large part of that time, he was a man that sat by the door and didn't say much of anything, didn't really offer any opinions. That's changed a little bit recently. Now, when Clarence Thomas got on the Supreme Court, he said that he was being unfairly lynched by innuendo and rumor, and that none of it was true. Recently, new facts have come forward about Mr. Thomas and his relationship to America's own oligarch community. It would indicate that Mr. Thomas is not using the same standard to hold himself accountable as he does those that come before the court. It would seem that Mr. Thomas feels that he's got a unique entitlement that should not be questioned by the public. Now, I've never been one of those people that believe that federal judges should have lifetime appointments. When you don't have to be concerned with people evaluating the quality of your work, the nature of your personal integrity, the character that you bring to your job, you can get lazy. And clearly, Justice Thomas has gotten kind of lazy and he's gotten kind of sloppy because much of what we're hearing now, which is undisputed, about his financial dealings with his white benefactor are not what you expect from someone sitting on the highest court in the land. And, I'm going to be real with you. I'm not one of those people that will ever play this game of, well, he's skin folk. Because one thing I know is all skin folk ain't kin folk. And you gotta let him go. Now, if Mr. Thomas, because I'm not going to call him Justice anymore, had any inkling of integrity, he would immediately recuse himself from hearing any more cases until these issues are resolved. And if in fact they are all found to be valid, his next step should be to step down from the U.S. Supreme Court and allow Joe Biden to fill that seat with someone else. He has forfeited his right to sit on the highest court of the land. And I want to put it in perspective for you, because when you allow fraud, when you allow corruption to creep into the courts, it has a snowball effect that affects everything in the country. And I'm going to give you a bit of history. When Hitler came to power in Germany in 1932, he instituted something called the People's Court, which replaced the German court system. And the reason he instituted the People's Court was so that he would have the ability to determine the outcome and deliver it to the judges before a case ever came before the court. So we were no longer dealing with justice. We were dealing with an autocrat who had complete power of whether someone was guilty or innocent. And we saw Donald Trump pack not just the Supreme Court, but federal courts with people who he thought would do his bidding. You can't have any measure of justice if justice is predetermined based upon political leanings. So it's time for Justice Thomas to recuse himself and allow the court to gain back some credibility. Because right now it's on shaky ground. I want to turn back again now to the state that we live in and we love. You know, the city of Highland Park has asked the governor to allow them to file for Chapter 9 bankruptcy to avoid a $20 million debt that they have to Great Lakes Water Authority. That debt was caused by Highland Park having to shut down its own water system because it was in need of repairs and to switch over to GWLA. Now, they thought that the state was going to step in and help them to pay for those repairs. That didn't happen. So over the last few years, they built up a huge debt to GWLA. And GWLA now, according to some sources, has said that if there is no debt service rendered almost immediately, that they will cease to deliver water to the Highland Park community. Now, that's scary. That's real scary because we already have seen water crises occur in Flint and in Benton Harbor, and now we're going to create another one in Highland Park. I think the governor needs to step forward and do whatever is necessary to make sure that the people of Highland Park are not deprived of clean, safe water. This is not something that anybody in this state should be playing games with. It needs to happen now. Moving on. Let's talk about the fact that in Michigan, we have not had a Black statewide elected office since Richard Austin left the Secretary of State's role in 1996. That should be concerning for everybody, because what it means is that we are consistently turning out for the Democratic Party Yet when it comes time to select folks and support folks for statewide office, it doesn't happen. And I want to take you back to the 2018 election when I was a candidate for governor and when Pat Miles was a candidate for the Attorney General office. Now, if you remember, we just talked about the fact that people were saying that Alyssa Slotkin is well suited for replacing Debbie Stabenow as Michigan's next senator because she's highly qualified. Remember those words, highly qualified. In 2018, Pat Miles was highly qualified, much more so than Dana Nessel. However, the much more qualified Pat Miles, a black man, didn't really get any significant support in the primary by folks that weren't ready to have a black attorney general. And when you look around the rest of the country, a lot of states are making progress. They're moving forward. They're making changes and adapting to a new set of demographics. Not happening in Michigan. Not happening in Michigan. So I'm going to be so bold as to tell you that we have got to make the Michigan Democratic Party recognize that they don't just get our votes because we're Democrats. They get our votes when the playing field is level and every candidate, be they white, black, brown, or whatever, gets a fair shake. The backroom deals, the predetermined elections have got to stop. We can't claim to be better than the Republicans, but continue to do the same things behind closed doors that Republicans do. It's not right. Now, when I made comments earlier and posted them on my blog page and on my Facebook page, a lot of folks came back at me and they were upset. If you're upset, ask yourself if what I'm saying is true or not. Because sometimes the truth doesn't go down easy. It's not always a smooth pill to swallow. But it's important that we be prepared to hear it and then do something about it. You know, one of the things that I've consistently said is that politics in this country have gone amok because we expect things that we're not willing to inspect. And we let things go to the point where they're out of hand before we want to respond to them. You know, I'm going to tell you something I said a couple of years ago. If you want immediate action on gun control, on gun policy in this country, only one thing has to happen. Just one. If within the next 10 days, 1 million black folks went out and bought AR-15s, you would see Congress come up with new gun legislation faster than you could put on your hat, because that would be the thing that scared them. You know, right now, they want to put guns in people's hands. They want the communities to be afraid. They want old men shooting at 16-year-old boys because it doesn't impact them the same way it impacts us. And we got to be smart enough to recognize that what works for them doesn't always work for us. So we got to do things differently. You know, Detroit on the last ballot had a proposal on it for the formation of a reparations commission. That proposal passed. And that proposal called for the creation of a commission with 11 folks that were going to look at and propose ways that reparations could be delivered to the community. Well, that reparations commission wasn't formed and didn't have its first meeting until last Tuesday. Now, I got to ask you a question. Do you really believe that people are serious about something if they wait 16 months before they have their first meeting about it? We've got to recognize when folks are just doing things to appease us and when they're doing things because they're real. And, you know, right now, if I lived in the city of Detroit, I'd be raising some ruckus because, you know, if you didn't think that forming a commission was a priority, then you're not serious about it. You know, there are things going on that we've got to be very attentive to because they will have a unique effect on our community. And it's frightening that every day there are things going on that should alarm folks and should wake them up and call them to action that they're not responding to simply because they've grown apathetic. It's been over a year since Patrick Leoya was murdered in the city of Grand Rapids. And the trial for Officer Shure was supposed to start in March. Now that trial has been put off again until October. Now, when people delay going to trial, it's because they recognize that witnesses become unmotivated, that people forget things, and that when people are given the opportunity to move something out of their vision, they do it. And when the news media is no longer covering something that they interpret that as it not being important, and justice goes unserved. Because delay tactics are what people with money do. Now, Officer Shure has money because he's got the union backing him up. And I think it's important that we recognize that for Patrick and his family to get justice is critical for changing the law enforcement direction that Michigan has moved in. You know, I pray that they get justice, but I'm truly afraid that they won't. I want you to think about these things. And then after you think about them, I want it to be a call to action for you. This has been Bill Cobbs with Bill Cobbs on the Record.